Hi everyone, I'm Tim Sevenhusen. I'm the founder of Oracle'sElixir.com and the former director of esports analytics for 100 Thieves. In this video today, I want to look at the current Valorant championships and look at the group stage, which just concluded. And I want to explore the stats of the players from that group stage and show the power of data in Valorant to measure player performance when it's applied and calculated properly, or at least in a way that I have developed that I think is very effective to do so. So we're going to be using a metric called rounds above replacement that I developed while at 100 Thieves. The actual details of how it's built right now are still proprietary. I'm not going to go into it too much. Since I don't know yet at this point whether I'm going to end up working inside another team next or not, and I got to hold some trade secrets to myself, but I want to show how accurate this can be and how useful it can be, because we're going to look at the player performances from champions as if we never watched a single round of the tournament so far. Let's jump in and just point out some of the players here who really stand out. We're going to be looking at just a spreadsheet I've set up that has all the group stage stats for the players in it. And I've got the link for this spreadsheet in the video description. So you can explore this, and at the end of every day of the tournament, I've been updating these numbers in there so you can follow along as we go. So right away at the very top of this is sorted by rounds above replacement. I'll just show what the columns are. So we've got the player, the team they're on, how many rounds they've played in the tournament, their round win rate, because that's always helpful context. Then we've got the rounds above replacement column. And to help interpret this number, so this number represents the number of rounds a player will earn for their team across a best of 3 relative to a replacement level player. And replacement is defined as basically a player that you could bring up from tier 2, just an average tier 2 player, and bring in, and this is how much better this player is performing compared to them, how much more they would earn for their team. So Alfajer so far at Champions has earned his team almost 6 rounds per BO3 relative to what a replacement player would bring. As a kind of a rule of thumb on this, about a 1.5 would be like an average VCT level player. Anything above a 2.5 or maybe a 3 is getting to like a really star performance level. In a single series, you can get numbers much higher than this, but this stat is really meant to be extrapolated across multiple series in a longer time frame. So with 2 best of 3s under his belt, a 5.6 is really, really high. A level that I would be very surprised to see him sustain throughout the entire tournament. I've got cast plus minus in here as well. What this does is it takes their cast, it compares it to an expected cast. And if you're not familiar with that stat, it's the percent of rounds in which they get at least a kill, an assist, that they survive, or that they are traded. So they die and somebody kills their killer within a short time frame afterwards. This compares their cast to the expected cast based on the agent they were playing, the map they were on, and which side, whether they're on attack or defense that round. So Alfajer has gotten 13 percentage points more cast than you would expect, which is also just a huge number. We've got kills and deaths for basic context, and then I'm reporting first kills and first deaths, but I'm only counting the ones where they got the first kill and weren't traded out afterwards on that kill, or they were the first death and also weren't traded out. So only untraded first kills and first deaths, which, I mean, look at that, 16% as a Sentinel player. It's just really absurd. So Alfajer, without having, we're acting like we haven't watched even a single round of Fnatic playing in this tournament so far. We can see he's playing like best player on the world level so far in this tournament. And I don't think that's an unreasonable takeaway from, based on what I have watched. Some other players that really stand out at the top of this list. I don't know how people are pronouncing this name, to be honest. From FPX, obviously the team didn't do very well, but individually, looks like he didn't have a better than expected cast, but in the rounds where he had an impact, he had huge impact. So he's the only other player with over a RAR of 5. ZmjjKK stands out really high, the 3rd highest RAR in the tournament. And I think he's been having a great tournament so far. So this is one where, a lens you can take on this is, let's say you were looking at this tournament and wanted to go ahead and build a roster in an upcoming offseason. And let's say you had this data across a much wider time frame, the entire year or a good chunk of the year. You'd be looking at ZmjjKK and saying, okay, superstar level player if he kept this up the entire year. He's playing at a superstar level in this tournament. Again, not with a super high cast, but having huge impact in the rounds where he does pop off. Some other players up at the top here, and you can see that some of them are players who have not been on winning teams, such as Cloud, who always seems to put up really, really strong numbers, despite the team having, let's say above average, but not amazing performances, and at this tournament weren't that great. YZ from BLG, really, really high. We got a few players kind of tied here. A couple of players from Foot as well. I've seen a lot of people talking about Nobody, so I'd be looking to watch him as well. So a lot of players at the top of this, and from what I've seen, I think this is a pretty good list of the players who have done really well. It's not going to be perfect. No stats representation of player performance is going to be perfect, but I think this will get closer than any other stats you're going to find out there. And if you compare it to kind of the common perceptions of player performance, this is generally in the past I've seen it's quite close, and I think this holds up. Let's look at some of the players that I expected to be really exciting coming into the tournament. Kong is one of them, and we can see he's here, and he's, what is this, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10th, the 10th highest draw in the tournament so far. I'd say that's delivering pretty well. As a duelist, I think cast isn't the most important thing necessarily. You want to be going out there and taking over rounds, but you don't have to take over every round. So his cast is a little on the low side, but he's got a really high UFK. I think this is, this issue here of him giving up the first death a little too often is maybe holding him back just a little. But for anybody who was hoping that Kong would have a big tournament, so far he seems to be doing that. Another one in a similar way would be Something from PRX, because we're so excited to see he's going to debut on the international stage, or at least in the kind of a global scale event outside of VCT. He has not been performing that well. Now, I think probably if you compared these numbers to the eye test and what most people are out there saying, nobody would say Something is playing badly. Or not many people would feel that way based on what I've seen. I may be a little off on that, but these stats are actually below average. So he's playing at below a VCT average level relative to what you would expect out of a duelist player, playing on the maps and on the agents that he's playing. That said, he's got a really high cast plus minus, so he's he's doing something in most rounds, in a very high number of rounds, and you can see he's got a pretty high untraded first kill. But the things he's doing in these rounds maybe aren't having the biggest impact. Maybe he's getting the third or fourth kill of a round most rounds, and it's not, or he's surviving a lot of rounds without generating a kill, something like that. So, I think these stats raise the question of, okay, Something maybe isn't delivering on the hype so far. And an interesting thing is to look at the rest of the team, because that can tell us something as well. If we look for all of PRX, we've got Forsaken up here doing quite well. We've got Mind Freak performing around an average level. Devi, a little bit higher than Something, and then Something and Jing are both at this slightly lower level. Now, given the number of rounds they're winning, their RARs as a team are a little bit low. It's a little hard to know exactly what story that tells, but it might just be that given the way, I won't go into it too much on the kind of the theoretical point of this and how it's calculated, but when teams don't play a whole lot of swingy rounds with back and forths, the RARs can be a little bit suppressed sometimes. That might be what's happening here is PRX are either blowing out a lot of rounds or being blown out in a lot of rounds, maybe a lot of aces. And that's just a kind of an interesting side note on, this is no stat is ever perfect, and this is one area of RAR that it's interesting to see a team, winning 60% of their rounds, but nobody in that really high, like those 3, 4, 5 RARs that we were seeing from some of the other players. But that said, nobody on their team is in the negatives. They're playing a bit, a few of them have stats a bit below average, but nothing too concerning, right? It's more just with Something we had high expectations that he's going to go out and take over. So far, he hasn't really been. Obviously, some teams and some players have been underperforming so far in the tournament. We can look to the data to see what story it tells about them. NRG would be a big one. So we can look at the stats for NRG, and I think, Artis has come under fire a lot, partly maybe due to expectations and not living up to them. I've seen comments about, are Victor and Crashies consistent enough? Are they strong enough players to really get to that kind of best in the world level? Or were they being, did they not deliver at that high enough level for every single tournament? When you look at the stats for this team, Crashies has the best numbers on the team. He had a 2.7, which is quite good. Again, that's getting into like a star level number. If he sustained that the whole year, you'd say this is one of the best players in his position in his league, which I think is a pretty fair thing to say about Crashies most of the time. So we got Crashies here. Victor is the second highest stats on the team. So interestingly, those have been the two best performers on the team at this tournament, or those were the two best performers. Som up there, 2.0. That is nothing to sniff at. That's a pretty good performance. And Som has been great all year statistically. When we look down below that, that's where we get to Artis at a 0.4. So even slightly lower than something who we were talking about as a bit of a disappointment earlier. And Finesse, but for IGLs, usually their individual stats, no matter what system you're using, tend to be a bit suppressed. So just from the stats, again, we're treating this as if we haven't watched a single round. We would look at NRG and say, man, Artis is not delivering what we would expect out of him. Being an imported player, having some big shoes to fill with this core playing with Ye last year. There's something to look at there, right? If there's a narrative of Artis underperforming, this backs that up. I think another interesting team to look at is TL, who I personally had higher expectations for, but I knew they were coming into a very difficult group. So TL, the question is, who on their team played well and who didn't? If you look at I've looked at some other stats out there, and there's some better and some weaker stat systems for rating players. I think Nats has gotten a little underrated on his performance in this tournament. He had the highest RAR on Team Liquid in my system at a 2.4, which is pretty good. But after him, we've got Safe at a 1.0, which is 39% round win rate, and getting 1.0. Your team did not do very well, but it was the second best on the team. A little bit below average. Not hugely concerning, given that it was only two matches. Then you look at the other three on the team, and they have three of the weakest statistical performances in the entire tournament so far. Redgar and Yampi both at around the negative 1.5-ish, and Soulcast negative 2.1. Only three players with a weaker performance at the tournament. So I think this tells you when you are going to go into the VODs, again, like let's put on our hat of we're going into an off season, we're trying to decide which players to go and pursue or which players to go and do deeper VOD review on, maybe check some references on. And based on these numbers, if these represented a wider sample, we'd be saying, man, Redgar, Yampi, and Soulcast, some concerns there, but maybe still worth looking at Nats and Safe. Of course, when you look at the rest of the year, I think Yampi especially does jump much higher, and the other two I think are obviously much stronger numbers than this on the whole. But again, that's just an example of how you can look at these numbers and what they can tell you, how they can be used. So again, the link for this spreadsheet, you can find that in the description. You can explore these numbers yourself. I'm going to be updating them, continuing to update them daily as the tournament goes along. Would be fascinated to know what other people think of these, which players they think are statistically being rated too high or too low based on their actual performance. And I think there's always great conversations to have about that, because these numbers are not intended to be a perfect representation. They're intended to get you closer or to get you some big steps along the way there to help you know what to look for or to kind of contextualize what you're seeing with your eyes. So this is I think a fun way to look at things. In my opinion, a stronger statistical representation than anything else out there that I've seen. And I hope you guys find it interesting and have some good conversation about it. Thanks for watching.